The afternoon sun was slowly fading, painting the quiet suburban streets with a warm golden color. The boy walked home from basketball practice, his sneakers softly hitting the pavement. His bag hung over his shoulder, heavy with books in his basketball shoes. It was a normal day, or at least it started that way. He had stayed behind at the gym to shoot a few extra baskets, lost in the sound of the ball hitting the rim and the echo of it bouncing on the wooden floor. Basketball was his escape. It was the one thing that helped him clear his mind from the noise of everyday life. As he turned down a familiar street, he felt the evening breeze brushing against his skin. He pulled his hoodie closer. There was nothing unusual about that walk, just houses, cars parked neatly along the curb, and the sound of distant music coming from someone's backyard. He stopped by a small corner store like he always did, to grab a bottle of water and a snack before heading home. The shop owner smiled at him as he paid. Everything seemed calm, but as he stepped outside, a police car rolled up and stopped abruptly by the curb. The sound of tires scraping the road made him turn his head. 2 officers got out. One of them pointed slightly in his direction. The boy froze for a second, unsure if they were looking at him. "Hey, you," one of them called out. He turned slowly, his heart skipping a beat. The officer's tone wasn't friendly, it was sharp, demanding. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked, walking closer. The boy blinked, confused. "From practice, sir." "The high school gym?" The officer's eyes scanned him up and down, from his hoodie to his basketball bag. "What's in the bag?" "Just my shoes and my jersey," he replied softly. "Mind if we check?" The other officer added, already reaching toward the strap. He hesitated. His mother always told him to be respectful when talking to police, but also to know his rights. He didn't want trouble, but he also didn't want to feel powerless. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. The first officer frowned. "You match the description of someone who broke into a car nearby," he said. The words hit him like a slap. His chest tightened. "A car?" "I didn't, I just came from practice." "You can ask my coach," he said quickly, trying to explain. The officer didn't seem to care. "Let's just check the bag, all right?" Before he could answer, one of them took the bag off his shoulder and opened it. The smell of sweat and rubber filled the air, just a pair of worn sneakers and a basketball jersey. The officer looked through everything anyway, tossing things around carelessly. The boy stood still, his hands slightly shaking. People were walking by, staring. A woman nearby slowed her car to watch. Someone across the street took out a phone and started recording. The boy could feel his face getting hot. Not just from the sun, but from embarrassment. He wanted to disappear. "Do you have any ID on you?" the other officer asked. "It's in my wallet," he said. "Can I get it?" Slowly, the officer warned. He moved carefully, taking out his wallet and handing it over. His fingers trembled slightly. His voice was barely steady. "It's my school ID," he said. The officer looked at it, then at him. "You sure this is you?" "Yes, sir," he said, trying to keep eye contact even though he wanted to look away. The first officer stepped closer. "You nervous?" He nodded faintly. "Yes, sir. Why's that?" "Because I don't know what's happening," he said, his throat tightening. The silence between them was heavy. The officers glanced at each other. One of them started typing something on his radio, calling in a report. The boy could hear bits of the conversation, something about a young male, dark hoodie, possible suspect. He wanted to call his mom, but when he pulled out his phone, the screen blinked red. The battery was almost dead. He opened his mouth to ask if he could call her, but before he could speak, one of the officers said sharply, "Hands where I can see them." He froze. His phone slipped slightly in his hand, and the officer immediately stepped closer. "I said hands up." He raised his hands, terrified. I was just my mom." The officer cut him off. "Step over here." They guided him toward the police car, one hand lightly pushing him forward. It wasn't rough, but it wasn't gentle either. He stood there facing the car, the cool metal against his palms. The world around him felt distant. The sound of cars passing, a dog barking, the soft hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Everything felt muffled. He could feel eyes on him. The people who knew him from the neighborhood were watching, whispering. He'd always been the quiet kid, the one who never got into trouble, who helped neighbors carry groceries. And now he was standing in front of a police car with his hands up. One of the officers looked through his bag again, clearly unsatisfied. "You said you were coming from the gym?" "Yes, sir." "Why did it take you so long to get home?" I stayed after practice to shoot some hoops, he answered quickly. The officer looked doubtful. You live around here? Yes, sir. 2 blocks down. All right, then why don't we walk there? Let's see if your story checks out. The boy's mouth went dry. Can I please call my mom first? She's home. The officer didn't respond. He just motioned toward the car. Stay where you are. He swallowed hard, trying to stay calm like his mother had always taught him. If something ever happens, she once told him, keep your voice calm. Don't argue. Be respectful. I'll always be there, but right now she wasn't here. The officers stepped aside, talking quietly to each other. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could tell by their tone that they didn't believe him. He felt small, powerless. He wasn't angry yet, just scared. Minutes passed slowly. The boy tried to focus on breathing, but his heart wouldn't slow down. Every second felt like forever. He thought about his mom's face when she'd find out about this. She'd be worried, but also furious. He could already imagine the look in her eyes. One of the officers walked back toward him. We're going to hold you here while we check with dispatch, he said. For what? Just standard procedure. But I didn't do anything, he whispered. The officer didn't answer. More cars passed. More people stopped to stare. The boy could see a reflection of himself in the car window, his shoulders slumped, his face tight with fear. He looked like someone he didn't recognize. A few moments later, one of the officers got a call on his radio. The voice was faint, but the boy caught a few words, something about no confirmed match yet. Still, the officers didn't let him go. He wanted to believe that this would end soon, that someone would realize the mistake. But each minute that passed made that hope fade a little more. He looked at the store behind him, the one he'd visited 100 times. The owner was watching through the glass door, his face filled with worry but his hands tied by fear of getting involved. A small boy across the street pointed at him, asking his mother what was happening. The woman quickly pulled her child away, whispering something. The teenager turned his face toward the ground. He didn't want anyone to see the tears forming in his eyes. The air grew heavier as the sun dipped lower. One of the officers sighed and leaned against the hood of the car. The other kept glancing toward the end of the street as if waiting for someone. The boy stayed quiet. He didn't know what else to say. Every time he opened his mouth, the words just felt useless. Finally, one of them said, "We'll wait for confirmation. If it's not you, you'll be on your way." He nodded weakly, though inside he felt broken. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet here he was, standing like a suspect while the world watched. He thought about how easily everything could change, a normal walk home turning into something terrifying in just a few minutes. He didn't know it yet, but something unexpected was about to happen, because just a few streets away, his mother had finished her day at work earlier than usual. She was driving home, her mind filled with thoughts of dinner and the files she'd left on her desk. Then her phone buzzed, a message from a neighbor saying police cars were outside near the corner store. Something told her to check it out. Something in her heart whispered that it involved her son. She turned the car toward the street, and in that moment, everything was about to change. The sound of distant traffic filled the air as the boy stood frozen beside the police car. The sun had slipped lower, leaving long shadows across the pavement. His backpack still sat on the hood, half unzipped, his basketball shoes spilling out. The officers were still talking quietly to each other, checking something on their radios, pretending not to notice the growing crowd nearby. He didn't move. He barely breathed. Every second felt heavy, like time itself had slowed down. His heart was still beating fast, the kind of nervous rhythm that made his whole body tremble. All he wanted was to go home. He wanted to sit at the kitchen table, eat dinner with his mom, and talk about his day like they always did. But right now, that felt like a faraway dream. Across the street, 2 people stood recording with their phones. He could hear them whispering. "He looks so young," one of them said. "They're really searching him for nothing." The boy heard it, but he didn't dare turn around. He just stared straight ahead, hoping this would end soon. The taller officer came closer again, his shadow stretching across the pavement. "You said you live nearby, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the boy replied softly. "Then why don't we call your parents?" "My phone is dead," he said, almost whispering. "Figures," the officer muttered under his breath. The other officer leaned against the car, arms crossed. "What were you doing behind the store earlier?" The boy frowned. "Behind the store? I wasn't." I just came out of it. You sure about that? Yes, sir. The officer's expression didn't change. He didn't believe him. The boy could see it in his eyes. There was a silence again, and in that silence he could hear the sound of his own breathing. One of the officers pulled out a small flashlight and shone it inside his bag again, even though it was still daylight. Nothing here, he said quietly. The other one shrugged. We'll wait for confirmation. The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. Can I please call my mom from your phone? She works nearby. She'll come right away. Neither of them answered. One of them looked at him and said, We'll see. He dropped his gaze to the ground, trying not to show frustration. His hands were still slightly shaking, but he kept them visible, just like his mom had taught him. The minutes stretched on. A small group of neighbors had gathered across the street, whispering among themselves. Some looked worried. Others looked unsure whether to step in. The boy's face burned with embarrassment. He had never been in trouble before. He wasn't the kind of person who even talked back to teachers. Now strangers were looking at him like he was a criminal. A few kids from his school rode by on their bikes. One of them slowed down, recognizing him. Hey, that's... he started, but the other kid pulled him away quickly. The boy wanted to disappear. Then suddenly one of the officer's radios crackled. No match on suspect description, said the voice on the other end. The boy felt relief wash through him like a wave. He thought this meant it was over. But instead of letting him go, the officer frowned. Still doesn't mean anything, he said quietly. Could be coincidence. The boy blinked in disbelief. But they just said it's not me. Calm down, the officer said. We'll finish our check. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice breaking slightly. The officer took a step closer. I said calm down. He bit his lip and nodded. He didn't want to make things worse. His chest felt tight, like his ribs were closing in around his lungs. He took a deep breath, trying to stay steady. Behind them, a car slowed down. Someone shouted from the window, "Leave the kid alone." The officers ignored it. One of them turned back toward him and said, "Put your hands back on the hood." He did as he was told. The cool metal felt cold against his palms now. His reflection shimmered faintly on the shiny surface, distorted by the shape of the car. He looked small, powerless. He could feel tears building up, but he blinked them away. He wasn't going to cry. He just wanted this to be over. A woman walking by stopped and asked one of the officers, "Is everything all right?" "He's just a kid." "Please move along, ma'am," the officer said quickly. The woman hesitated but then kept walking, glancing back several times. The boy's mind was racing. He thought about all the times his mom had told him stories about her job, how she worked hard to protect people, how justice was supposed to mean fairness, but right now nothing about this felt fair. He wanted to believe that if he just stayed calm, everything would be okay. But the longer it went on, the less sure he felt. He shifted slightly on his feet, his shoulders stiff. The officer behind him immediately said, "Don't move." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. The officer walked around to face him. "You nervous, huh?" he said. The boy nodded faintly. "Yes, sir." The officer tilted his head. "You look like you're hiding something." "I'm not," he said, his voice trembling. The officer leaned closer, studying his face. The boy's heart pounded so loud he could hear it echoing in his ears. The officer's stare felt like it lasted forever, but then he stepped back again and sighed. "All right, stay put." The other officer was now speaking into his radio again, asking about another report. The boy caught a few words. Teenager, dark hoodie, same area. He swallowed hard. Maybe there really was someone out there causing trouble, but it wasn't him. He wished they would just believe that. He tried to calm himself by focusing on small things, the way the wind moved the leaves on a nearby tree, the faint sound of a basketball bouncing somewhere in the distance, maybe from another kid heading home. It reminded him of the court, the gym lights, the smell of rubber and sweat, places where he felt in control. But here, on this street, under the officer's watchful eyes, he felt like none of that mattered. Minutes later, one of the officers got another message on his radio. Whatever it said made him glance at his partner. They exchanged a look that the boy couldn't read. Then the officer walked back toward him slowly. "All right," he said finally. "Looks like you're clear for now." The boy blinked. "Can I go?" The officer didn't answer right away. He looked uncertain, as if deciding whether to let him go or not. "Where do you live?" "Just 2 blocks away." "Fine," he said. "We'll escort you home." The boy hesitated. "Is that necessary?" "It's for your safety," the officer said, but his tone didn't sound convincing. The boy nodded reluctantly. He didn't want to argue. He just wanted this to end. As they started walking, the street lights flickered on. The air was cooler now. Every step felt awkward, his legs heavy, his thoughts spinning. He walked ahead, and the officers followed a few feet behind. The sound of their boots on the pavement echoed in his ears. They reached the corner where his street began. The boy pointed. "That's my house," he said quietly. But before he could take another step, the sound of screeching tires broke through the silence. A dark SUV pulled up fast, stopping near the police car. The doors opened quickly. The officers turned toward it, tense. The boy's eyes widened. He recognized that car. His mother stepped out, wearing her work clothes, a dark suit, her hair pulled back neatly. Her face was calm, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. She took one look at the scene, her son standing there, his bag open on the car, 2 officers hovering over him, and her expression changed. "Is there a problem here?" she asked firmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The officers looked at her, uncertain. "Ma'am, we're handling an investigation," one of them started. "Into my son?" she asked, cutting him off. The boy watched her, a rush of relief and fear mixing in his chest. He knew that tone, the one she used when she was in control, the one that made people stop talking and listen. "Ma'am, who exactly are you?" one officer asked, his voice cautious now. She reached into her jacket slowly and pulled out her badge. The silver gleam caught the fading sunlight. The officers froze. The crowd nearby went quiet. The boy stood still, his breath caught in his throat. His mother's calm voice filled the air again. "You want to tell me?" she said. "Why 2? Officers have my son standing here like a suspect?" The officers exchanged nervous looks. The one who had been the most vocal earlier took a step back. "Ma'am, we were just checking a report." "A report that doesn't match him," she said firmly. No one spoke for a moment. The air felt heavier than before. The boy finally exhaled, the tension slowly leaving his body. His mom's presence changed everything. For the first time that evening, he felt safe. And as the officers stumbled through their explanations, he realized something important. Sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to speak it out loud. The moment his mother stepped out of the car, the entire street seemed to fall silent. Even the sound of the wind softened, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She walked toward them calmly, but her steps carried authority. She wasn't rushing, yet there was something powerful about the way she moved. Steady, confident, in control. Her son stood still beside the police car, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. His chest was still tight from fear, but when he saw her, a sense of relief washed over him like warm sunlight after a storm. He knew that look on her face. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was focus. The 2 officers turned to face her, both straightening up instinctively. The taller one cleared his throat. "Ma'am, please stay back. We're handling an investigation." Her eyes flicked from her son to the officer's badge, then back again. "Handling an investigation?" she repeated slowly. "By detaining a teenager walking home from practice?" "Ma'am," the other officer began, "we received a report about a possible suspect in the area." He matched the description. "And what description would that be?" she asked, her voice sharp but controlled. The officer hesitated. "Male, dark hoodie, athletic build." She took a step closer, holding up her badge. So that's enough to stop a child? Search his bag without consent and make him stand like a suspect? The officer's eyes widened slightly as they saw the small letters on the badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The air seemed to shift. Ma'am, we didn't realize, one started. She cut him off calmly. You didn't need to realize who I am. You needed to realize who he is, an innocent kid. Her voice was even, but each word carried a quiet weight that made both men take a step back. She wasn't shouting, but her tone commanded the kind of respect that didn't need volume. The boy stood there quietly, watching the scene unfold. He could see the tension in his mother's jaw, the way her hand rested near her waist where her badge hung. She wasn't angry just because they stopped him. She was angry because she knew exactly what could have happened if she hadn't arrived. She turned slightly toward her son. Are you okay? He nodded slowly. I didn't do anything, he said softly. I know, she said. Her voice softened for a moment before she turned back to the officers. Now, she said, I'd like to see your supervisor. Ma'am, there's no need for that. The taller officer began, but she interrupted again, this time more firmly. There is a need. You just detained a minor without proper cause. You need to explain why. The officer stammered, looking uncomfortable. It was a misunderstanding. She raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? You searched his bag, you made him put his hands on your vehicle, and you called for backup. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a series of choices. A few people from the crowd had started whispering. Someone whispered, "She's FBI." Another person began recording again. The officers shifted nervously, their earlier confidence melting away. One of them finally spoke, his voice quiet. Ma'am, we truly didn't mean any disrespect. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Disrespect isn't the problem here, she said. Bias is. The boy's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't like attention, and now there were more people watching than ever. But he couldn't help feeling proud. Proud that his mother stood up for him. Proud that she didn't let fear silence her. The taller officer glanced toward his car, probably wishing he could drive away and pretend this never happened. We're sorry, ma'am, he said at last. We were responding to a call. We didn't intend to cause any harm. She sighed softly, still calm but unrelenting. Intent doesn't erase impact, she said. You may have thought you were doing your job, but what you really did was teach my son that walking home in his own neighborhood can make him a suspect. Neither officer said anything. The silence between them was heavy, uncomfortable. She looked down at her son again, brushing his sleeve lightly, checking him like a mother does when she needs to be sure he's really okay. You didn't say or do anything wrong, right? He shook his head. No, I just tried to explain. And they didn't listen? He swallowed. No, ma'am. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That's what I thought. The officers stood awkwardly beside the car, unsure what to do next. One of them started to reach for his radio, but she stopped him with a look. Don't, she said simply. I'll handle the call myself. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the car, the badge numbers, the scene around them. Her movements were calm and professional, but there was fire in her eyes. The officers didn't dare stop her. Ma'am, please, one of them said quietly. We'll file a report ourselves. Oh, I'll make sure you do, she replied. And I'll make sure it reaches the right people. The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the tension and the sound of raised voices. A few people murmured words of support. Others just stood silently, unsure how to react. One of the officers finally said, Look, we're sorry, okay? We were doing what we thought was right. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said quietly, Doing what's right means asking questions before making assumptions. It means seeing a kid as a kid, not as a threat. The boy watched as the officer lowered his eyes. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. His mother turned to him again. Get your things, she said gently. He picked up his bag from the car hood, the zipper still half open, his shoes dangling from it. The bag felt heavier than before, like it carried not just his belongings, but the weight of everything that had just happened. As they started walking back toward her car, the officers stood silently behind them. The boy glanced back once. They were still watching, but now their posture had changed, less confident, more reflective. His mother opened the passenger door for him, her hand steady. Get in, she said softly. He climbed in, the leather seat warm from the afternoon sun. The car smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the scent he always associated with her work. She got in on the driver's side and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The silence inside the car was deep, almost heavy. The boy looked out the window, watching the officers still standing near their car, talking quietly. His mother took a deep breath. "I want you to know something," she said finally. "You did everything right." He looked at her. "It didn't feel like it," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know, sometimes it won't, but you stayed calm. You kept your hands visible. You didn't argue. You survived the moment. And that matters." Her voice softened then, the strength in her tone giving way to a kind of tenderness that only a mother could have. "I'm sorry you had to experience that. I wish I could have been here sooner." He stared at his hands. "I didn't think it would happen here," he said. "Not in our neighborhood," she gave a sad smile. "It happens everywhere," she said quietly. "That's why I do what I do." He turned to look at her, studying her face. For the first time, he noticed the faint lines of exhaustion under her eyes, the kind that come from years of fighting battles most people never see. "I thought I could handle it," he said softly. "But when they told me to put my hands on the car, I got scared." Her hand reached over and rested gently on his shoulder. "Fear doesn't make you weak," she said. "It makes you human. What matters is that you stayed smart." Outside the window, the last bit of sunlight was fading, turning the sky into soft shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood looked peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. But inside the car, everything had changed. After a few moments, she started the engine. "We're going to file a report," she said firmly. "Not because I want to punish them, but because I want this on record. They need to learn." He nodded, still quiet. As the car rolled down the street, the boy saw the store owner standing by the window, watching them leave. The man lifted a hand, almost like an apology, and the boy gave a small nod in return. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when everything is still but the air is full of meaning. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, the boy allowed himself to exhale fully. He looked out the window and saw the world passing by. The same streets, the same houses, but everything seemed a little different now. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand lightly as they pulled into their driveway. "You're safe now," she said softly. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Thanks, Mom." She gave him a tired smile. "Always." The mother stood there, her eyes fixed on the officers, her son beside her looking shaken but trying hard to keep his composure. The moment was heavy with silence. The officers shifted uncomfortably, the confidence they had minutes ago now gone. One of them opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand slightly, a small, calm gesture that immediately quieted him. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "You've detained my son. I need you to tell me exactly why." The officers exchanged glances, the one in front finally speaking. "We received a report about a possible car break-in. The suspect matched his description." Her gaze didn't move from his face. "Matched his description," she repeated softly as if testing the words. "And what was that description exactly?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner. The partner shrugged, clearly unsure what to say. The mother tilted her head slightly. "You mean a young black teenager wearing a hoodie?" she asked, her tone calm but cutting. Neither of them answered. The people who had gathered nearby could sense the change in the air. Phones were still recording, but now the focus had shifted. The story was no longer about a boy being targeted. It was about a woman standing tall for her child. Her son stood beside her quietly. He wanted to disappear, but he also felt something rise inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt during the entire encounter. Relief. His mom was here and she was in control. She turned slightly toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I didn't do anything, Mom, I was just—" "I know," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to explain." Then she looked back at the officers. "You've searched his bag without a warrant, detained him without cause, and made false assumptions based on appearance. I hope you understand how serious that is." The first officer's mouth opened, but she continued before he could respond. "Do you realize what kind of situation you created? You approached an unarmed minor, raised your voices and made him fear for his life, for doing absolutely nothing wrong. That's not law enforcement, that's intimidation." Her words carried weight, not because she was yelling, but because of how calm she remained. The kind of calm that comes from authority, confidence, and truth. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge, holding it up so both officers could see. "Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd gasped softly. The officers' faces went pale. One of them immediately stepped back, stuttering. "Ma'am, we didn't know." "That's the problem," she interrupted, lowering her badge. "You shouldn't have to know who someone's parent is to treat them with respect." Her son stood silently, watching his mother take control of the situation. He'd seen her handle difficult people before, on the phone, in meetings, but never like this. She wasn't just defending him. She was teaching them a lesson. The senior officer tried again to explain, his voice shaky. "We were just following a call. The description was vague, but..." She cut in gently. "But vague is not a reason to detain a child. It's a reason to verify facts. It's a reason to be cautious. What you did was jump to conclusions." Other patrol cars began to arrive. The local sergeant stepped out, recognizing the situation immediately. When he saw her badge, his tone changed completely. "Agent, we're sorry. We'll handle this." She gave him a cold look. "You'd better." The sergeant pulled the two officers aside, speaking to them in a low voice. They looked embarrassed, nodding repeatedly. Meanwhile, the mother turned to her son, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Take a deep breath," she said softly. "You're safe now." He nodded, swallowing hard. His hands were still trembling slightly. "They thought I stole something, Mom. They didn't even ask questions. They just started..." "I know," she said, her voice lowering. "You don't have to relive it right now. Let's just get through this." She turned back to the officers. "I want their badge numbers, their body cam footage, and the report of the call they claim to receive." Her tone was even, but every word landed like a command. "And I'll be filing a formal complaint with the department." The sergeant nodded quickly. "Of course. You'll have everything you need." The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring among themselves. A few people came up to her son, offering quiet words of support. Someone said they'd been recording the entire thing and could share the video. The mother thanked them politely, her focus still steady. The officers looked humiliated now, their earlier authority completely gone. One of them muttered an apology. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. We just thought..." "You thought wrong," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And thinking wrong in your line of work has consequences." Her words weren't said in anger. They were said as a fact. The kind of fact that left no room for argument. Her son looked up at her, admiration and disbelief mixing in his eyes. She didn't shout, didn't lose control. She just stood there, calm and sure, like she'd been waiting her whole life for a moment like this. Not to prove power, but to demand fairness. The sergeant returned with a notepad. "We'll get the documentation to you, Agent. And again, we're sorry for this misunderstanding." She looked at him. A misunderstanding is when two people hear different things. This was misconduct. Make sure that's reflected in your report. He nodded silently, knowing there was nothing else to say. As they walked back to their car, her son finally spoke. "Mom, what if you hadn't shown up?" She looked at him, her face softening. "Then I'd still find out and I'd still fight for you," she said. "But I need you to understand something important. Not everyone in law enforcement is like that. There are good officers who do their job the right way. These two just forgot what that looks like." He nodded, still processing everything. "You weren't scared?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Of course I was. Any mother would be. But fear doesn't help. Truth does, calm does. That's what they don't expect. Calm." When they got home, the tension began to ease a little. She made him sit down, got him a glass of water, and just watched him for a while. The boy still looked shaken. "You're strong," she told him softly. "You kept your cool. That's something not everyone can do in that kind of moment." He looked down at his hands. "It didn't feel strong," he said. "I just didn't want to make it worse." "That's exactly what strength looks like," she replied, knowing when to stay still and when to speak up. That night she wrote down everything that happened while it was still fresh in her memory. Every word, every action, every detail. She knew how these things went, how stories could be twisted or forgotten. Not this one. Not her son's story. Her son went to bed early, but he couldn't sleep. He replayed the whole thing in his mind. The fear, the flashing lights, the sound of her voice cutting through it all. For the first time that day, he felt something new. Pride. Not in himself, not yet, but in her. In the days that followed, the local police department tried to handle the situation quietly, but word spread fast. The video posted by a bystander had gone online and people were talking. The clip showed everything. The officers confronting a nervous teen, and then the moment his mother arrived and the entire tone changed. The comments were flooded with support. People praised the mother's composure, the way she carried herself, the way she reminded the officers and everyone watching what accountability looks like. Reporters began calling. Neighbors dropped by offering encouragement. Some people wanted her to press charges. Others wanted interviews. She refused both. For her, this wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about principle. At work, her colleagues at the bureau heard about what happened. They offered her support and reminded her she wasn't alone. One senior agent told her, "You handled it better than most would have." That's exactly the kind of example the world needs. She smiled politely, but inside she was still processing it all. She wasn't proud of what had happened. She was proud of how her son survived it. And that mattered more than anything else. That evening, as they sat together on the porch, her son asked, "Do you think they'll really change after this?" She sighed softly, looking at the fading light. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "But it starts with moments like this. People see it. They think about it. And maybe next time someone else gets treated differently because of it." He nodded, looking out at the street where it all began. "I hope so," he whispered. She put her arm around him, pulling him close. "You did everything right," she said. "And I'm proud of you." He leaned against her shoulder, quiet now. For the first time in days, he felt safe again. Not just because his mom had saved him, but because she'd shown him something powerful. That standing up for what's right doesn't always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it means staying calm when the world expects you to break. The days after the incident felt both ordinary and extraordinary. On the surface, life went back to its usual rhythm. School, basketball practice, homework, meals at the kitchen table. Yet underneath, the boy carried the memory of that evening like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. Every time he walked past a police car or saw a uniform, his chest tightened. A small reminder that the world could sometimes treat him unfairly. At home, his mother had made sure to create a calm space. She knew that even though the immediate danger had passed, the emotional weight lingered. She wanted him to feel safe, to process what had happened, and to understand that fear was a normal reaction. She didn't want him to feel ashamed or guilty for feeling scared. One evening, as they sat together on the porch with the last hints of sunlight fading behind the trees, she began talking gently. "What happened to you wasn't fair," she said, her voice steady. "And it wasn't your fault. You need to remember that." He nodded quietly, picking at the grass between his fingers. It felt like everything I did was wrong, even though I was just walking home." She reached over and placed her hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what makes it hard. You did everything right. You stayed calm, you followed directions, and you kept yourself safe. That's courage, even if it didn't feel like it." He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Courage?" "Yes," she said softly. "Courage isn't just about running into danger. Sometimes it's about keeping calm when the world is against you, about staying steady when everyone else is rushing to judge." For the first time since that evening, he felt a sense of pride, quiet, warm, and unshakable. It wasn't about what had happened. It was about what he had done in response. The next day, the local police department reached out formally. Their internal review had begun, and the officers involved were being questioned. The mother made sure to stay involved, ensuring the investigation was fair and thorough. She wanted accountability, not revenge. Her son didn't need someone else learning a lesson at his expense. He needed the truth to be recognized. Meanwhile, the video from the bystander had gone online. It quickly spread, reaching far beyond the small neighborhood where it happened. People were talking about it, sharing it, commenting on it. The clip showed the entire scene. The officers approaching the boy. The fear in his eyes, the tension building, and then the arrival of his mother. Calm, authoritative, commanding attention without raising her voice. The comments poured in. Many expressed shock and sadness that such an event could happen to a child walking home. Many praised the mother's calmness and professionalism. Some people shared their own experiences with unfair treatment. Others debated what police training and awareness should look like. The boy watched some of the comments with his mother. his fingers curling around hers. "It's a lot," he said softly. "I know," she said. "But sometimes seeing the world react like this helps. People are paying attention now. That matters." In school, he returned to his routine. Some classmates who had heard about the incident whispered to each other, curious but respectful. Others acted as if nothing had changed. He appreciated that balance. He didn't want to be treated differently just because of what happened. But he also couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched, the lingering awareness that he had been the center of fear and suspicion. During basketball practice, he felt it most acutely. Running across the court, dribbling, shooting, all the things he loved, he found himself thinking about the officers, about judgment based on appearance, and about how quickly a situation could spiral. Yet the court remained his sanctuary. With each basket he scored, he reminded himself that he was more than one evening, more than fear, more than someone else's assumption.